Bikers threaten a woman alone at night. The truth about her shocks everyone. The streets were eerily quiet as Lila walked home, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. A faint breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the sidewalks, and the occasional hum of a distant car broke the silence. It was late, well past midnight, and the town seemed to have settled into its usual slumber. Lila glanced at her phone, checking the time. 12:47 a.m. She sighed, tucking her phone back into her coat pocket. The diner shift had run late again, and all she wanted now was to get home, slip out of her uniform, and sink into bed. Her modest apartment was only a few blocks away, but the emptiness of the streets made her uneasy. She quickened her pace, her eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to stretch and shift under the streetlights. As much as she tried to shake the feeling, a small knot of tension coiled in her stomach. It wasn't the first time she'd walked home alone at this hour, but something about tonight felt different. She was halfway down the block when the low rumble of motorcycle engines reached her ears. The sound grew louder, closer, and Lila's steps faltered. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see two bikers approaching from behind. They slowed as they neared her, their headlights casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called out, his voice rough and mocking. "Out here all alone? That's dangerous." Lila's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She didn't respond, keeping her gaze forward as she quickened her pace. The bikers didn't take the hint. They revved their engines, circling around her and cutting her off. "Where you going in such a hurry?" the other biker sneered, his helmet glinting under the streetlights. Lila stopped, her mind racing as she assessed the situation. The first biker dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his leather jacket adorned with patches that hinted at a gang affiliation. The second biker remained on his motorcycle, his posture relaxed but his presence no less menacing. "I don't want any trouble," Lila said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. The first biker chuckled, taking a step closer. "Trouble? We're not here to cause trouble. Just wanted to say hi." His tone was mocking, his grin predatory. Lila's grip tightened around her bag, her mind racing as she calculated her options. The street was deserted, and no one was likely to come to her aid. She needed to stay calm, to think clearly. "Let me pass," she said firmly, taking a step back. The second biker laughed, the sound low and mocking. "Feisty, aren't you? I like that." The first biker reached out, grabbing her arm. The moment his hand touched her, something inside Lila shifted. Her fear was replaced by a cold, focused determination. She had been in situations like this before, and she knew what needed to be done. With a sudden burst of movement, Lila twisted her arm free and stepped to the side, using the momentum to drive her elbow into the biker's ribs. He stumbled back, caught off guard by the unexpected resistance. "What the?" he growled, clutching his side. Lila didn't give him a chance to recover. She stepped forward, her movements precise and deliberate, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the ground with a grunt, cursing as he tried to get up. The second biker, shocked by what he'd just witnessed, dismounted his motorcycle and advanced toward her. "You little..." Before he could finish, Lila turned to face him, her stance steady and ready. She didn't wait for him to make the first move. Instead, she launched a kick aimed at his knee, forcing him to stagger backward. "What the hell is this?" the first biker snarled, climbing to his feet. His expression was no longer amused, it was angry and dangerous. Lila's pulse pounded in her ears, but she refused to back down. She knew she couldn't let them gain the upper hand. "Walk away," she said, her voice low and steady. "No." The first biker laughed, though it was more a growl than a sound of amusement. "You think you can scare us? You've got no idea who you're messing with." "Maybe you don't either," Lila shot back, her eyes narrowing. For a moment, the bikers hesitated, as if re-evaluating the situation. Then, the first biker muttered something under his breath. A name, or maybe a curse. Lila couldn't quite make it out, but it sent a chill down her spine. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice sharp. The biker smirked, wiping at his lip where a small cut had formed. "You'll find out soon enough." The sound of a car approaching in the distance seemed to snap the bikers out of their stance. They exchanged a glance, and the second one mounted his bike again. "This isn't over," the first biker warned, his gaze lingering on Lila as he climbed onto his motorcycle. She watched as they sped off into the night, their taillights disappearing around the corner. Only then did she allow herself to exhale, her shoulders slumping as the adrenaline coursing through her veins began to fade. Lila glanced around, ensuring the street was clear, before resuming her walk home. Her steps were quicker now, her senses on high alert. She couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had been more than just a random act of harassment. There was something deliberate about the way they had targeted her, something that didn't sit right. When she finally reached her apartment, Lila locked the door behind her and leaned against it, her breathing uneven. She replayed the encounter in her mind, her instincts telling her that this was only the beginning. Lila woke the next morning with a lingering unease. The events of the night before replayed in her mind as she sipped her coffee at the small kitchen table in her apartment. The way the bikers had singled her out, the name muttered under the first biker's breath, it all felt deliberate, calculated. It wasn't the kind of encounter that happened by chance. The sound of her phone buzzing snapped her out of her thoughts. She reached for it, half expecting a call from her manager at the diner about another shift. Instead, the screen displayed an unknown number. Frowning, she hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello." There was a brief pause before a voice crackled through the line. It was low and gruff, but unmistakably familiar. "You didn't think we'd let you off that easy, did you?" Lila's stomach dropped, her grip tightening on the phone. "Who is this?" "You'll find out soon enough," the voice replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. "You've got a lot of people interested in you, Lila. I'd be careful if I were you." The line went dead, leaving her staring at the phone in stunned silence. She placed it down slowly, her mind racing. They had her number. They knew who she was. This wasn't just a random encounter, it was personal. Her first instinct was to leave town, to pack her things and disappear like she had done before. But a part of her resisted. She had spent years running, hiding from the ghosts of her past, and she was tired of it. If the bikers were connected to what she thought they were, then running wouldn't solve anything. Lila stood, grabbing her jacket and keys. If they wanted to play games, so be it. She wasn't going to let them win. The streets of the town were bustling in the late morning light as Lila made her way to the only place she could think of for answers, the garage on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much to look at, just a small, rundown building with a couple of motorcycles parked out front, but she had heard whispers that it was a gathering spot for local bikers. She approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. As she stepped inside, the smell of oil and grease hit her, mingling with the faint scent of cigarette smoke. A man in a leather jacket looked up from where he was working on a bike, his gaze narrowing as he noticed her. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone guarded. "I'm looking for someone," Lila said, keeping her voice steady. Two bikers, one tall with a patch on his jacket, the other shorter with a scar over his left eyebrow. "They were out last night." The man studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "What do you want with them?" Lila hesitated, weighing her words carefully. "They seemed interested in me. I want to know why." He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached her. "Look, lady, I don't know who you are or what you're trying to do, but if you're smart, you'll stay away from them. They're part of a crew you don't want to mess with." "What crew?" Lila pressed, her heart pounding. The man hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "The Iron Vultures. They're trouble, serious trouble. And if they've got their sights set on you, you're better off getting out of town." The name sent a chill down Lila's spine. The Iron Vultures. She had heard of them before, years ago, during her time as a private investigator. They were a notorious gang with ties to organized crime, known for their brutality and influence. And now they were after her. "Why would they be interested in me?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. The man shrugged, his expression cautious. "Don't know. But if I were you, I wouldn't stick around to find out." Lila nodded, her mind racing. "Thanks for the warning." As she turned to leave, the man called after her. "Hey, Whatever you're mixed up in, be careful. Those guys don't play fair. Lila gave him a tight smile and walked out into the sunlight, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had just learned. The Iron Vultures weren't the kind of people you crossed lightly. If they were after her, it wasn't just about last night. It was about her past. Back at her apartment, Lila dug through the box she had kept hidden in the back of her closet. It was old and battered, filled with relics from a life she had tried to leave behind. Case files, photographs, notes scribbled on scraps of paper. As she sifted through the contents, her hands trembled. Finally, she found what she was looking for, a folder labeled Carter Case. Inside were documents and photographs related to one of her most high-profile investigations, a case that had exposed a network of corruption and illegal activities involving politicians, law enforcement, and most importantly, the Iron Vultures. She had been young then, ambitious and determined to make a difference. The case had made headlines, leading to several arrests and the dismantling of a significant part of the gang's operations. But it had also made her a target. Threats had followed, forcing her to go into hiding and abandon the career she had once loved. Now, it seemed her past had caught up with her. As she read through the old files, a picture began to emerge. The bikers from last night weren't just harassing her, they were sent to find her. Someone from the gang must have recognized her, and now they wanted revenge. But there was something else, something nagging at the back of her mind. The note she had found under her door the night before hadn't just been a threat. It had included a cryptic message. "You still have what we're looking for. Bring it to us or else." Lila frowned, trying to make sense of it. What could they possibly mean? She had turned over everything from the Carter case to the authorities years ago. At least she thought she had. Her heart skipped a beat as she remembered one detail she had almost forgotten. There had been a flash drive, something she had found during her investigation but had never handed over. At the time, she hadn't been sure what was on it, and before she could figure it out, she had been forced into hiding. The drive had been buried with the rest of her belongings, untouched for years. Lila dug deeper into the box, her fingers brushing against a small, unmarked flash drive at the bottom. She pulled it out, staring at it as a mix of fear and curiosity washed over her. This was what they were after. It had to be. Lila knew she couldn't go to the police, not yet. The Iron Vultures had connections everywhere, and she couldn't risk tipping them off. Instead, she decided to figure out what was on the drive herself. She plugged it into her laptop, holding her breath as the files loaded. The screen filled with folders labeled with cryptic names and dates. As Lila clicked through them, she realized the drive contained detailed records of the gang's operations, financial transactions, names of associates, and evidence of their illegal activities. It was a goldmine of information, enough to take down the Iron Vultures and anyone connected to them. But it also made her a bigger target than ever. Her phone buzzed again, jolting her from her thoughts. Another unknown number. Lila hesitated before answering. "Did you find it?" the voice on the other end demanded. Lila's grip tightened on the phone. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb," the voice snarled. "You have the drive. Bring it to us or you'll regret it." "Why should I?" Lila shot back. "What's stopping me from going to the authorities?" The voice chuckled darkly. "You think they can protect you? We own this town. You've got 24 hours. After that, you're on your own." The line went dead, leaving Lila staring at the screen in disbelief. She had a decision to make: give the drive to the Iron Vultures and hope they left her alone, or take a stand and risk everything to bring them down. Her mind was made up almost instantly. She had spent too long running, too long hiding. It was time to fight back. Lila sat at her kitchen table, the flash drive resting between her fingers like a ticking time bomb. She knew what was on it now, enough evidence to bring down the Iron Vultures and the powerful network they supported. But it also painted a massive target on her back. This wasn't just a gang looking for revenge anymore. This was about power, control, and silencing her for good. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest. She could disappear again, try to outrun them like she had before. But that thought made her sick. She wasn't the same woman who had fled all those years ago. She had learned to fight, to survive. And now, she would fight for justice. She plugged the flash drive back into her laptop, opening the files one by one. The deeper she dug, the more connections she uncovered, names of local officials, businesses laundering money for the gang, and even a few federal agents who were on their payroll. The level of corruption was staggering. A name caught her attention: Malcolm Hayes. She leaned closer to the screen, her heart pounding. Hayes had been a mid-level operator in the Vultures when she last investigated them, but it seemed he had climbed the ranks. Now he was listed as the gang's leader. Lila's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She needed help, but the question was, who could she trust? Later that evening, Lila parked her car on the edge of an industrial complex just outside of town. The area was quiet, almost eerily so, with the dim glow of streetlights casting long shadows over the crumbling buildings. She had made contact with an old friend, Tom, a former investigator she had worked with during the Carter case. If anyone could help her, it was him. Tom emerged from the shadows, his tall frame hunched slightly as he approached her. He looked older than she remembered, with more gray streaking his hair and deeper lines etched into his face. But his sharp eyes still carried the same intensity. "Lila," he greeted her, his voice low. "It's been a while." "Too long," she replied, glancing around nervously. "Thanks for meeting me." He motioned for her to follow him into one of the abandoned warehouses. Inside, it was dark and musty, but Tom had set up a small workstation with a laptop and a few scattered files. "You said you had something big," he said, gesturing for her to sit. Lila handed him the flash drive. "It's everything I've been hiding since the Carter case. The Iron Vultures are after me because of this." Tom plugged the drive into his laptop, his expression growing darker as he scanned the files. "This is bigger than I expected," he murmured. "If this gets out, it could take down their entire network." "That's the plan," Lila said, her voice firm. "But I can't do it alone." Tom leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "You're not going to like this, but the safest way to handle this is through the authorities." "They're compromised," Lila shot back. "Look at the names on that drive. Some of them are law enforcement. I can't trust anyone." Tom nodded grimly. "You're right. But going public with this will put you in even more danger. The Vultures won't stop until you're silenced." "I know," Lila said, her jaw tightening. "That's why I need your help. We need to hit them first, expose everything before they can stop us." Tom hesitated, then sighed. "All right, but we'll need a plan. And backup." The next 24 hours were a blur of preparation. Tom reached out to a few trusted allies, journalists, activists, and former colleagues, who could help disseminate the information once they were ready. Meanwhile, Lila worked to secure her apartment and gather supplies for what she knew would be a fight. She stayed vigilant, her senses on high alert. She knew the Iron Vultures wouldn't wait long before making their next move. And they didn't. The first attack came just after midnight. Lila was in her apartment, reviewing the final details with Tom over the phone, when the lights flickered and went out. Her stomach clenched as she moved to the window, peering into the darkness below. 2 motorcycles were parked outside, their riders scanning the building. "They're here," she whispered into the phone. "Get out now," Tom urged. "We'll meet at the safe house." Lila grabbed her bag and the flash drive, moving quickly but quietly. She slipped out through the fire escape, her heart pounding as she descended into the alley below. The sound of footsteps echoed nearby, and she froze, pressing herself against the wall. The bikers were searching for her, their voices low but audible. "Check the back," one of them said. She couldn't have gone far. Lila waited until their footsteps faded, then moved swiftly through the alley, keeping to the shadows. She reached her car, parked a few blocks away, and slipped inside. As she started the engine, headlights flared behind her. A third motorcycle roared to life, and her pulse spiked. The biker sped toward her, closing the distance as she pulled onto the main road. Lila gripped the wheel, her mind racing. She couldn't lead them to the safe house. She needed to lose them first. The chase was relentless. The biker stayed on her tail, weaving through traffic as Lila pushed her car to its limits. She took sharp turns, darted through alleys, and even doubled back in an attempt to throw him off. But he was persistent. Finally, she spotted an opportunity, a narrow construction site with scaffolding and barricades. She veered into it, her car barely squeezing through. The biker hesitated for a split second, and it was enough. Lila sped through the sight and out the other side, losing him in the maze of debris. By the time Lila reached the safe house, her hands were trembling. Tom was waiting for her inside, his expression grim as he took in her disheveled state. "They're not going to stop," she said, her voice shaking. "They'll keep coming until I'm dead." "Then we hit them first," Tom replied. "I've got the files ready to send to every major outlet. Once this goes live, the vultures won't have anywhere to hide." Lila nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let's do it." The next morning, the files were released. News outlets across the country picked up the story, exposing the Iron Vulture's operations and their connections to powerful figures. The public outrage was immediate, and law enforcement agencies were forced to launch investigations. But Lila knew the fight wasn't over. The gang would retaliate, and she needed to be ready. That evening, as Lila sat in the safe house, the sound of motorcycles echoed in the distance. She stood, her body tense as the noise grew louder. "They've found us," Tom said, grabbing a weapon from the table. Lila took a deep breath, her mind steady despite the fear. "Then we make our stand." The roar of engines filled the air as the bikers surrounded the building, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Lila and Tom braced themselves, knowing the confrontation would be their toughest yet. As the first biker kicked down the door, Lila stepped forward, her fists clenched and her determination burning bright. She wasn't the same woman who had run from her past. This time she was ready to fight. The roar of motorcycles echoed through the air as the Iron Vultures closed in on the safe house. Lila stood in the center of the dimly lit room, her breath steady but her heart pounding in her chest. Tom moved beside her, double-checking the loaded revolver in his hand. "They're going to try to overwhelm us," Tom said, his voice low but calm. "We need to hold them off long enough for backup to arrive." "Do we even have backup?" Lila asked, her eyes scanning the room for anything that could be used as a weapon. "I called in a favor with an old contact in the state police," Tom replied. "They'll come, but it'll take time. Until then, it's just us." The sound of boots hitting the gravel outside sent a chill through the air. Lila gripped the handle of a crowbar she had found, her fingers trembling only slightly. She wasn't a stranger to danger, but this felt different, raw, personal, and far more dangerous than anything she'd faced before. The front door shuddered as one of the bikers kicked it. Lila braced herself as the second kick splintered the frame, and the door swung open. A tall man in a leather jacket stepped inside, a shotgun slung over his shoulder. His cold eyes scanned the room, landing on Lila. "There you are," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "You've caused us a lot of trouble, lady." "You should have left me alone," Lila shot back, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Now the whole world knows who you really are." The man chuckled darkly, motioning for the others to enter. "You think that's going to stop us? We've survived worse than this. You, on the other hand, won't survive the night." The first biker stepped forward, raising his shotgun, but Tom fired first. The shot rang out, loud and sharp, and the man crumpled to the ground. Chaos erupted as more bikers poured into the room, shouting and brandishing weapons. Lila swung the crowbar at the closest attacker, the impact sending him stumbling backward. She moved with precision, her instincts from years of training kicking in. Every swing, every step, was calculated, designed to keep her moving and out of reach. Tom fired again, keeping the attackers at bay, but the bikers weren't backing down. One of them lunged at Lila, grabbing her arm and yanking her toward him. She twisted free, slamming the crowbar into his knee and sending him crashing to the ground. "Lila, watch out!" Tom shouted. She turned just in time to see another biker charging at her. She ducked, the man's knife narrowly missing her shoulder, and drove her elbow into his stomach. He doubled over, giving her just enough time to grab his weapon and toss it out of reach. The room was a flurry of movement, the air thick with the sounds of grunts, gunshots, and breaking furniture. Lila's chest heaved as she fought off one attacker after another, her determination outweighing her exhaustion. But the bikers kept coming. Outside, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, a beacon of hope cutting through the chaos. One of the bikers cursed, glancing toward the sound. "Cops are coming. We need to move." The leader of the group, a scarred man with a commanding presence, stepped forward. He grabbed one of the remaining bikers by the collar, shoving him toward the door. "Hold them off. We're not leaving without her." The man turned to Lila, his eyes narrowing. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long. Time to end this." Lila's grip tightened on the crowbar as the leader approached. He moved with a dangerous confidence, his posture indicating years of experience in violence. She knew this fight wouldn't be like the others. He lunged at her, and she dodged, narrowly avoiding his swing. She countered with a strike of her own, but he was fast, catching her wrist and twisting it. Pain shot through her arm as the crowbar fell to the floor. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, his voice low. "But guts won't save you." Lila gritted her teeth, using her free hand to drive a punch into his side. He stumbled but didn't let go, tightening his grip on her wrist. She twisted her body, leveraging his weight against him, and managed to break free. The leader sneered, drawing a knife from his belt. "Let's see how tough you really are." Before he could attack, a gunshot rang out, striking the floor near his feet. Tom stood in the corner, his revolver aimed steadily at the leader. "Back off," Tom warned, his voice cold. "Or the next one won't miss." The leader hesitated, his gaze shifting between Tom and Lila. The sound of the sirens was deafening now, and flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows. "This isn't over," the leader growled, backing toward the door. "You've made some powerful enemies, lady. You'll regret this." With that, he turned and ran, disappearing into the night along with the remaining bikers. The safe house fell silent, save for the distant wail of sirens and the pounding of Lila's heart. Moments later, the police arrived, swarming the area with weapons drawn. Lila and Tom raised their hands, explaining the situation as officers secured the scene. A detective approached them, his sharp eyes taking in the wreckage. "You're lucky we got here when we did," he said, his tone serious. "Looks like you had quite the fight." Lila nodded, her body aching but her resolve unshaken. "They're not going to stop. They'll keep coming until someone takes them down for good." The detective's expression softened slightly. "We've already received reports about the files you released. If what you've got is as solid as it seems, this could be the end of the Iron Vultures." "It has to be," Lila said, her voice firm. "Because I'm not running anymore." In the days that followed, news of the Iron Vultures' criminal activities spread like wildfire. The files Lila had released sparked widespread outrage, leading to arrests and investigations that unraveled the gang's network piece by piece. Malcolm Hayes, the gang's leader, remained at large, but law enforcement agencies across the country were on high alert. Lila stayed in hiding, moving between safe locations as she worked with Tom to ensure the evidence reached the right hands. Despite the danger, she felt a sense of relief, of purpose. She had spent years running from her past, but now she was reclaiming it, using her skills to fight for justice. One evening, as she sat in a quiet motel room, her phone buzzed with a message from Tom. They found Hayes. "It's over." Lila stared at the screen, a mix of emotions washing over her. Relief, exhaustion, and a lingering sense of unease. She knew this victory wouldn't erase the scars of her past, but it was a step toward healing. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. But as she packed her bag to move to the next location, a knock at the door sent her heart racing. She grabbed the crowbar she kept by the bed, inching toward the door. "Who is it?" she called out. A familiar voice replied, low and calm. "It's me, Tom. Open up." She hesitated, then unlocked the door. Tom stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" she asked, sensing his tension. "They got Hayes," he said, his voice quiet. "But there's something you need to see." He handed her a folder, and as she opened it, her blood ran cold. Inside were photographs, images of her, taken over the past few weeks. Her walking home, meeting with Tom, even inside the safe house. "They're still watching you," Tom said, his tone grim. "This isn't over, Lila." "Not yet." Lila closed the folder, her jaw tightening. She had known the fight wouldn't end easily, but she hadn't expected it to follow her so closely. Then we keep fighting, she said, her voice steady. Until it is. The room was dark, save for the dim glow of the lamp on the nightstand. Lila sat cross-legged on the motel bed, the folder Tom had given her spread out in front of her. The photographs, each one a chilling reminder that she was still a target, were arranged in neat rows. She stared at them, her mind racing. "They're still out there," she said, breaking the silence. Tom sat across from her, his arms crossed. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his voice was steady. "We knew they wouldn't just give up. Taking down Hayes was a big win, but there are always people willing to take his place." Lila's fingers tightened around the edges of one of the photos. It showed her walking into the diner she used to work at, her expression tired but unaware of the eyes that had been following her. "They've been watching me for weeks. Even after I went public with the files. That's how these groups operate," Tom said. "They intimidate, they stalk, and when that doesn't work, they strike." Lila's jaw clenched. She had already lived through one ambush, barely making it out alive. The thought of going through it again made her stomach churn, but she refused to let fear control her. "So what's the plan?" Tom leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We stay a step ahead. Keep moving. Keep them guessing. And we use this." He tapped the folder. "The fact that they're still watching you means they're scared. They know you're a threat." "A threat?" Lila echoed, her tone bitter. "I'm one person. They're an entire network." "Yeah," Tom said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "But you're one person who's already taken down their leader and exposed their operations. Don't sell yourself short." Lila met his gaze, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "All right, let's finish this." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Lila and Tom moved from one safe house to another, carefully avoiding any patterns that could give away their location. They communicated with their network of allies, journalists, activists, and law enforcement officials to ensure the files Lila had released continued to gain traction. The public outcry against the Iron Vultures had reached a fever pitch. News outlets were flooded with stories about their crimes, and protests erupted in cities across the country. Pressure mounted on law enforcement agencies to dismantle the gang completely. But Lila knew the Vultures wouldn't go down without a fight. It was during one of these restless nights, as she sat reviewing the remaining files, that a new name caught her attention: Marcus Kane. The name was listed alongside Hayes in several documents, often in connection with major financial transactions and logistics planning. "Who's Marcus Kane?" Lila asked, holding up the file. Tom frowned, leaning over to take a closer look. "That's not a name I recognize. But if he's mentioned this often, he's important." Lila nodded, her mind racing. If Hayes was the leader, maybe Kane is his second in command. Someone who can step in and take over. Tom's expression darkened. "If that's the case, we need to stop him before he consolidates power. Otherwise, everything we've done so far could be undone." Lila pulled out her phone, scrolling through the contacts of people she trusted. "I think I know someone who can help us track him down." The meeting was arranged quickly, in a nondescript coffee shop on the outskirts of a neighboring town. Lila and Tom sat at a corner table, their backs to the wall, as they waited for their contact to arrive. A few minutes later, a woman in her late 30s walked in. She was dressed in a leather jacket and jeans, her sharp eyes scanning the room before she approached their table. "Lila," the woman said, her tone cautious but familiar. "It's been a while." "Emma," Lila replied, standing to shake her hand. "Thanks for coming." Emma sat down, her gaze flicking to Tom before settling on Lila. "When you said you needed help, I didn't expect it to be this big. The Vultures are dangerous." "I know," Lila said. "That's why we need to act fast. We're looking for someone named Marcus Kane. Do you know anything about him?" Emma leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Kane's a ghost. He operates in the shadows, handling the logistics and finances for the Vultures. If Hayes was the face of the gang, Kane is the brain. Do you know where we can find him?" Tom asked. Emma hesitated, then nodded. "There's a warehouse on the edge of the city. It's one of their safe houses, used for meetings and moving money. If Kane's still in the area, he'll be there." Lila exchanged a glance with Tom. "Then that's where we're going." The warehouse was as unassuming as Emma had described, a gray, industrial building surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusting machinery. Lila and Tom parked a few blocks away, moving on foot to avoid detection. The area was quiet, but Lila's senses were on high alert. She could feel the weight of the crowbar tucked into her bag, a familiar reassurance as they approached the building. "This place gives me the creeps," Tom muttered, glancing around. "Stay focused," Lila said, her voice steady. "We need to get inside and find Kane. If we can take him down, the vultures will crumble." They reached the side entrance, finding it unlocked. Lila pushed the door open slowly, peering inside. The interior was dimly lit, with crates and boxes stacked haphazardly along the walls. The air smelled of oil and dust. They moved silently through the space, their footsteps barely making a sound. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as they approached the main area, where voices echoed faintly. Peering around a corner, she saw a group of men gathered near a table. At the center was a man who matched Emma's description of Kane, tall, with a lean build and sharp features. He was speaking in a low voice, gesturing to a map spread out before him. "That's him," Lila whispered to Tom. Tom nodded, his grip tightening on his revolver. "What's the plan?" "We need to separate him from the others," Lila said, her mind racing. "If we can isolate him, we have a chance." Tom looked skeptical but nodded. "All right, let's do it." Lila grabbed a small metal object from a nearby shelf and tossed it across the room. It clattered loudly against the floor, drawing the attention of the group. "What was that?" one of the men asked, his hand moving to his weapon. "Go check it out," Kane ordered, motioning for two of the men to investigate. As the others moved toward the noise, Lila and Tom took their chance. They crept closer to the table, staying low as they closed the distance. When they were within striking range, Lila sprang into action. She swung her crowbar at one of the remaining men, knocking him out before he could react. Tom fired his revolver, hitting another in the leg and sending him to the ground with a yell. Kane turned, his expression shifting from surprise to anger. "Who the hell are you?" Lila stepped forward, her eyes locked on him. "The person who's going to finish what Hayes started." Kane's jaw tightened as he reached for his weapon, but Lila was faster. She swung the crowbar, striking his arm and causing him to drop the gun. He stumbled back, clutching his arm, but didn't go down. "You think you can take us down?" Kane sneered. "We're everywhere. Taking me out won't stop us." "Maybe not," Lila said, advancing. "But it's a start." The fight was brutal. Kane was fast and skilled, dodging her attacks and countering with precision. But Lila's determination outweighed his strength. She blocked his punches, landed her own strikes, and eventually drove him to the ground. Tom moved in, his revolver trained on Kane as Lila pinned him down. "It's over," Tom said. "You're done." Kane glared up at them, his breathing ragged. "You don't know what you're getting into." Lila leaned closer, her voice cold. "I know enough. And now, the world will too." Kane struggled beneath Lila's grip, his defiance burning in his eyes. "You think you've won?" he hissed, his voice laced with venom. "You're just scratching the surface." Lila's expression remained cold, but her mind raced. She had seen this before, criminals who thought they were invincible, who believed their networks were too vast and too powerful to be destroyed. But she also knew how fragile those networks could be when their key players fell. "It's over," she said, her voice steady. "You can try to intimidate me, but it won't work. Hayes is gone and you're next." Tom stepped forward, his revolver still trained on Kane. "You're coming with us," he said firmly. "We'll hand you over to the authorities, along with everything we've uncovered." Kane laughed bitterly. "The authorities? You really think they'll protect you? Half of them are in our pocket. The moment I'm in custody, this whole operation gets buried." Lila felt a chill run down her spine. She knew there was truth in Kane's words. The files she and Tom had released had exposed some of the corruption within law enforcement, but the system was still riddled with holes. If Kane had allies in the right places, he could escape and retaliate. "Then we make sure you don't slip through the cracks," Lila said, tightening her grip on him. "We'll expose every connection, every bribe, every deal. You won't have anywhere to hide." Kane sneered but said nothing. Tom pulled out a set of zip ties, securing Kane's wrists before hauling him to his feet. "Let's move," he said, glancing at Lila. "We need to get out of here before his buddies come back." Lila nodded, grabbing the files and documents scattered across the table. They could be crucial evidence, and she wasn't leaving anything behind. The drive to the safe house was tense. Kane sat in the back seat, his wrists bound, while Lila kept a watchful eye on him. Tom drove in silence, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror for any signs of pursuit. Lila's mind raced as she replayed Kane's words. His confidence, even in captivity, was unsettling. He wasn't bluffing. He truly believed his network was too powerful to be dismantled. And that meant they still had a long fight ahead of them. "We need to move quickly," she said, breaking the silence. "If Kane's right about having allies in law enforcement, they'll be looking for us as soon as they realize he's gone." Tom nodded grimly. "I'll reach out to our contacts again, see if we can arrange a secure handoff. But we'll need to vet everyone carefully. We can't risk a leak." Lila turned to Kane, her voice sharp. "Who's next in line after you? Who's running things if you're out of the picture?" Kane smirked, leaning back against the seat. "You really think I'd tell you that? You're in over your head, sweetheart." Lila's jaw tightened, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she turned back toward the front, her focus shifting to their next steps. They couldn't afford to waste time. When they arrived at the safe house, a small cabin nestled deep in the woods, Tom secured Kane in one of the back rooms while Lila worked to organize the files they had collected. The room was quiet except for the sound of papers rustling and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. Tom returned, his expression serious. "He's not going to talk," he said, sitting across from Lila. "At least not willingly." "I didn't expect him to," Lila replied, her tone measured. "But we don't need him to. The files we've collected can tell us everything we need to know." Tom leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "What's the next move?" "We go public," Lila said without hesitation. "Again. But this time, we don't just expose the gang. We expose every single connection they have, politicians, officers, businesses. If we shine enough light on this, they won't be able to hide." Tom nodded slowly. "That's a big risk. It'll paint an even bigger target on your back." "I know," Lila said, her voice firm. "But I'm done running. If this is what it takes to bring them down, then so be it." The next morning, Lila and Tom began compiling the files into a comprehensive report. They worked tirelessly, cross-referencing names, dates, and transactions to create a clear picture of the Iron Vulture's operations. Every connection they uncovered was like another piece of the puzzle falling into place. As they worked, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Kane's allies wouldn't sit idly by while she dismantled their network. They would come for her, and she needed to be ready. "Almost done," Tom said, his eyes scanning the screen in front of him. "This report is airtight. Once it's out, they won't be able to deny anything." Lila nodded, her gaze drifting to the window. The forest outside was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. She knew they were living on borrowed time. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sound of motorcycles echoed faintly in the distance. Lila froze, her heart racing as she exchanged a glance with Tom. "They found us," she said, her voice low. Tom grabbed his revolver, his jaw tightening. "We knew this was coming. Let's make sure they don't get what they came for." Lila secured the files in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, ensuring they would be safe if the worst happened. Then she grabbed her crowbar and moved to the front of the cabin, her body tense and ready. The sound of engines grew louder, accompanied by the faint glow of headlights cutting through the trees. Lila's grip on the crowbar tightened as the first motorcycle came into view, followed by several more. The Iron Vultures had arrived. Tom took a position by the window, his revolver trained on the approaching gang. "Stay low," he muttered. The bikers dismounted, their figures silhouetted against the fading light. One of them stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "We know you're in there. Hand over Kane and the files, and maybe we'll let you walk away." Lila's jaw tightened. She glanced at Tom, who shook his head. "Don't even think about it," he said. "They're bluffing. They won't let us walk away, no matter what." Then we hold our ground, Lila said, her voice steady. The bikers advanced, their boots crunching against the gravel. Lila's heart pounded as she prepared for the inevitable. This was it, the fight she had been preparing for. The first biker kicked open the door, his weapon raised. Lila swung the crowbar, the impact sending him crashing to the ground. Chaos erupted as more bikers flooded the cabin, their shouts filling the air. Tom fired his revolver, taking down 2 of the attackers. Lila moved with precision, her strikes calculated and efficient. The confined space worked to their advantage, forcing the bikers to funnel in one at a time. But the vultures were relentless. For every attacker they took down, another seemed to take his place. Lila's muscles burned with effort, but she refused to back down. She had come too far to give up now. Just when it seemed like the fight would never end, the distant wail of sirens broke through the chaos. The bikers hesitated, their movements faltering as the sound grew louder. "Cops are coming," one of them shouted. The remaining bikers exchanged glances before retreating, their figures disappearing into the night. Lila and Tom stood in the wreckage of the cabin, their chests heaving as the adrenaline coursed through their veins. "They'll be back," Tom said, his voice grim. "Let them come," Lila replied, her gaze hard. "We'll be ready."